Let's cover the fundamentals in understanding what exactly is a macro. A macro is essentially a recording of a predefined sequence of requests. Macros can be created from a variety of different requests. For example, your steps in making a successful login to the application can be recorded. Such login requests are usually post requests, and they can then be replayed later if Burp senses that it no longer has a valid session ID. What it will do is replay that login sequence, and voila, we have an active session in the web application again. Now, another great example for using macros is to copy the pattern of capturing anti-CSRF tokens. Now, a common design pattern used to implement anti-CSRF tokens is to provide a server-generated value, then place that value in a hidden field of a form. Upon client submission of that form, a validation check is done on the server side to determine a match between the initially generated value and the value presented in the hidden field. Now, the use of anti-CSRF tokens is a mitigation against session writing attacks that are made possible in the browser of the end user. Burp can capture this implementation pattern used in the application and replay that pattern accordingly in, say, Burp Intruder, so that you can just focus on other payload fields of interest instead of having to handle the validity of your tokens. So continuing our invalid session scenario we saw in our first demo, let's see how a macro can fix this problem. So where we last left off, Spider had logged us out. We did not have a valid session any longer to remain in the application, and we are prompted to go back to the login screen. We actually used our repeater tab to capture the particular situation where we have invalid session tokens now. From here, let's go ahead and create our first macro that can address this situation. Now, macros are built in the Project Options tab under the Sessions tab. From here, I'm going to add a new macro. I'm going to call it Log Me In. And I'm going to add a rule that's going to check when the session is valid. So if the session is invalid, I'm going to run a macro. So let's go ahead and create our macro. Now, as you can see, this is the HTTP history table that comes up. And of course, we want to base our macro action on the login that we did earlier, where we put in the user ID and password. Now, of course, after a login, we always have a 302 if it's coded properly. So because of the 302 redirect, I'm also going to grab the next request. So I'm grabbing the post, which is the login, and then the get, which is the dashboard display after the redirect. These are the two requests that I want to grab for my macro to be replayed whenever the session is invalid. Click OK. When you click Configure, what you're doing is you're ensuring that the variables that are set in the form are actually set to the appropriate values that you want them to be set to. So in the case of UID, we're making sure that it's set to the value of admin. Password is also set to the value of admin. Go ahead and click OK. Now I'm going to call my macro admin login. Now I can test my macro as well. As you can see, when the macro ran, I did receive these cookies. That's a good sign. That lets me know that I got a valid session token. If I look now at the dashboard, I can see that I'm greeted with that hello admin user again. But let's go ahead and run this macro in the context of our scope. So let's click OK, click OK. Now the last thing that we need to do is set the scope for this particular macro. I don't want it to be on all of these areas. I really just want to show that the macro can run in repeater. So I'm going to just set that as my scope. As far as the URL scope, I can either use what I've defined in the target tab because I have set it up properly. Or if you're not sure, you can include all URLs. So let's click OK. Return back to our repeater tab, and now when we click the Go, we're once again greeted with the Hello Admin user. And this is because of the magic of our macro. So we once again can continue spidering and ensure that we have valid session tokens.